I'm Amber McCrae, a nutritional therapist. I help women become more in tune with their mind, body, and soul through holistic nutrition and emotionally focused therapy. I help them create a more meaningful, energetic, and connecting life. Amazing humans, get ready to be inspired and empowered. I am absolutely thrilled to introduce my friend and incredible guest for today's episode of Connection Over Perfection. Please give a warm welcome to the one and only Heather, a passionate mental health advocate and the fearless host of the thought-provoking Hot Mess Espresso podcast. Heather's journey is nothing short of remarkable. With unwavering courage, she openly shares her personal experiences living with BPD, ADHD, and trauma, touching the hearts of so many along the way. Her vibrant tone and boundless energy light up every conversation she engages in, and her dedication to destigmatizing mental health is truly awe-inspiring. Through her own triumphs and challenges, Heather beautifully humanizes mental illness, emphasizing the profound importance of safe connections, emotional healing, and also holistic well-being. Her commitment to creating a more supportive and inclusive society is a beacon of hope for all of us. So without further ado, let's give a warm virtual applause to Heather as we embark on this transformative episode of Connection Over Perfection. Heather, welcome.
Hi, that was the nicest thing, but one of the top 3 nicest things anyone ever said about me.
That's awesome. You are amazing, and I'm so excited to have you on. So we're going to dive right in. So Heather, I would love to hear from you about how having safe connections has really impacted your journey with BPD. And in fact, actually, before we get into that, can you just tell the audience, explain what BPD is for us?
So BPD is, I'll tell you 2 things that it's not, because I hear this all the time. BPD is not bipolar disorder. And I know that it gets very confusing because bipolar disorder, but bipolar is one word, borderline personality is 2. So BPD is not bipolar disorder, and it is also not any kind of multiple personality or what's now known as DID, dissociative identity disorder. It has nothing to do with multiple personalities, and it's not bipolar. So it is borderline personality disorder. So what borderline is, it has 9 characteristics, and we kind of go over the 9 characteristics in the first episode of my podcast. So just for time constraints and stuff, I don't want to super go into it, but it has a lot to do with just a lot of very, very intense emotions. You don't feel things like a normal person. Disappointment and anger is end of the world or super ragey. It's also very much black and white, borderline struggle with a lot of gray area. They struggle with feeling one way about one person this day. It's completely different the next. It's a mess. It's a very intense disorder to live with. It's just a lot of intense emotions, a lot of intense up and downs. And that's where it gets confused with bipolar sometimes, because bipolar has a lot of mood swings, and they feel great about things for a couple of weeks and they feel horrible about things, and it's similar, but it's definitely not the same. And I go over what BPD is in the podcast, but also in future episodes I will be talking about the difference between bipolar and BPD for those that want to get into it more.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that clarification. That helps immensely with understanding and getting into my question, which is, how has having safe connections impacted your journey with BPD and your mental health diagnosis and just overall?
I think with having safe connections, it's a blessing and a curse. You definitely feel like you can process what you've been going through when you have a safe connection. So to not offend the many safe connections that I do have, I'm just going to stick with my husband for this one. My husband is what you would call a safe connection. He's a more stable, and when I say stable, I mean a more adaptive human being. He has his own stuff, but I feel like the last 3 years that I've been with him, I have been able to process what I've gone through, what I'm currently going through, all of that stuff. And having a safe connection is incredibly important because you are not constantly in crisis mode. And with borderlines, it's almost always crisis mode. So having a safe connection, for a visual metaphor, you're carrying around your trauma like the housewives pack for a weekend trip. If you've ever seen The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. So how they pack like for a weekend trip is how we mentally pack all of our crap.
Right.
So having a safe connection, you can take a couple pieces of luggage and kind of just leave them for a second. And it's a blessing and a curse because you're not adding to trauma and stuff with that person. But I know for me, I kind of feel worse sometimes. I remember when I first got with him, I think it was like 4 or 5 months in, and I was talking to my therapist and I'm like, why am I so cranky all the time? Like, I feel like being with him has made me worse. And my therapist looked me dead in the face and they were like, it's because you're not in survival mode. You've spent your entire life going from crisis to crisis to crisis. You're not in crisis mode with him. So you can start to unpack a lot of the crap that you had stored before that you couldn't unpack because you were with some, these. I'm not saying that all of my exes were toxic. Some of my exes are fantastic. I absolutely adore them. I'm still friends with them to this day. But all of a sudden, you realize you're the toxic person because when they're standing there and you're going off like you normally would because it's a defense mechanism and stuff like that, you're kind of taking a step back and you're like, whoa, actually, I'm not in the right here. They're not doing anything to me. I need to kind of reevaluate how I'm coming at this, basically. So that was a really long, I also have ADHD, so really long way.
No, that was perfect. Yeah, so I think I hear you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, that having safe connections can feel like a blessing and a curse because while in one aspect, it is amazing to have somebody hold all those emotions, hold you, love you in that space. But at the same time, they also maybe challenge you and they hold up a mirror and really allow space for you to see you. And
exactly
that's uncomfortable. And like you were saying, for so many of us who have lived in fight or flight, that survival mode, being in our parasympathetic mode, that rest and digest, can feel like we're crawling out of our skin, can feel so uncomfortable because we don't know what the fuck that we're supposed to do in those moments. Is that close?
That's exact. Like you feel like, oh, I have to actually improve on things, and you find things to improve while also not trying, because a lot of borderlines have like a favorite person. That favorite person is just like the person that you basically like, they are the tree to your koala. Like you latch on to them. But I'm full of metaphors.
I love it.
I missed like a killer poetry career or something. Because I know for me, I'm just going to speak personally for me because I don't want to speak for all borderlines because borderline is not one size fits all. Some people struggle with more characteristics harder than others. Some people have dealt with it differently. It's very not, which is why it's also hard to treat because it's not like bing, 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 bing. It is bing, bing, some of this category, some of this column, like a sprinkle over here, like your mother did what now kind of thing. So
yeah, exactly.
So when you latch onto a favorite person, that person is either so high up on a pedestal that even God couldn't touch him, or like bury them below hell. So it's very, very difficult for me to like not put all of my hopes and dreams and everything into him because he's a safe connection, because human nature is they will disappoint, and he has disappointed, and that has been very hard lessons for me to learn, that he is not this like perfect little human,
right?
And especially when like we have issues and I'm like, oh my god, he did this, this, and this, and my sister's looking at me like, okay, and because for me I'm just like, oh my god, he like shattered my sense of reality, and she's like, he didn't take the trash out. So it's just kind of like that, where so it's a blessing and a curse. You kind of have to, you want to give your all to them, and you love that you're not in crisis mode, but also you're in a little bit of a crisis mode because you're like, I can't scare this one off, damn it.
So. Right. Yeah. So I think I hear too that what you're saying is that because this person is safe and because you have been able to latch on, like you said, and they have allowed that, it's this very much all or nothing mentality.
Yes.
And it's either, like you said, that pedestal, or just you no longer are anything to me.
Right.
Puppies.
Better your dog than mine.
That's for all the puppy lovers listening. There you go.
Yep.
So what I think I hear you saying is that It's really tough because a lot of the times, especially what you experience, is this all or nothing mentality. And when raw spots are exposed, it feels catastrophic. And so trying to understand what's happening to you, like, hey, this feels catastrophic, but being able to say, I have a part in this too, and this person is still safe, even though they have disappointed me.
Mm-hmm.
And so really being in that vulnerable position, in that duality where this person can be safe and still disappoint me. Is that close?
Yeah, that's pretty much on point.
And that's so huge. So that brings me, to my next question is, Heather, I really do truly love being in your lives. I love listening to your podcast, just the way that your authenticity and the way that you talk about your journey is just really inspiring. And so I would love to hear more about your personal journey and how you navigate the medical system and how it's really shaped your perspective. So could you just dive a little bit into what's been helpful for you that you found in the system, and also maybe shed some light on where you feel like Western medicine or society at large may be falling short in supporting individuals with, say, things like BPD or CPTSD and other mental health challenges?
Well, for one, we don't have enough time to go over how much society fails the mental health system. So
there's your answer right there. Done, folks.
Done. That is the episode.
Right, exactly.
So to back up, what's been helpful within the system? Honestly, finding a good therapist. For a little bit of backstory, I had never heard of borderline until it was basically rock bottom. An acquaintance had mentioned it. I looked it up. I went, shit. And then, so that was 6 years ago. I had just finished aesthetic school. I don't know how the hell I made it through that, like undiagnosed, but I just finished aesthetic school. I had just been fired from a salon job, and I was just at the lowest point in my 20s. So I looked into it and I went to a therapist, and it's really funny because a lot of borderline is attachment abandonment issues. It's real fun when you're going to therapy and then your therapist is like, I'm leaving. And then you go to another therapist and they're going on maternity leave, which we love for them, but they're going on maternity leave. And then you find who is now my current therapist, but then they had some medical issues that they had to step away from therapy. So I wound up with a fourth therapist that wound up leaving for private practice, and I followed him for a while, and then I just couldn't afford it. So I went back to my now current therapist, who was back, and then they left for private practice, and I was like, you know what? We're going to sell feet pics on the internet if it means that I'm going to go with this therapist, because I was like, I cannot not have this therapist. So
Yeah.
Honest to God, a lot of it is finding a therapist that gets you. And I know that whole thing sounds really daunting. So for some people that are like, well, I don't want to keep switching therapists, I get it, because the last thing I want to do is be 6 years into my therapy journey and then my current therapist is like, I'm no longer practicing. It's almost like dating, where you're like, I don't want to have to go back over everything that's gone on, because
for sure, it's exhausting and traumatic.
Oh, so exhausting. But finding a good therapist, I don't have an issue with medication at all. It just doesn't really work for me. The problem with medication, Western medicine with BPD, is there is no cure for BPD medication wise. They treat the symptoms, they treat the anxiety, they treat the depression, and a lot of the times you wind up on bipolar meds for borderline because it's supposed to help with the intense mood swings, except for my personal non-medical opinion, disclaimer right there, is from what I understand about bipolar, it's a lot of brain chemistry. So the medication's supposed to help the brain chemistry, where borderline is a lot of trauma responses. The anxiety are trauma responses, stuff like that. It's less brain, genetic, internal. Some borderline is genetic, but not enough to really treat, obviously, with medication, or we'd have a medicine for it by now. So my issue with it is that, because I've been on several bipolar medications, and for some people, those medications work fantastic. And I'm letting you know right now, I'm really freaking jealous, because if I could just take some meds and feel slightly better, that would be great. So I think we're falling behind on medication because I really think that they don't know what to do. And then for society, we don't have enough time. You can find that on my podcast. But
Right.
a lot of the
Yes.
things is borderlines are just crazy. It's like a huge armchair diagnosis. Somebody's like out of control. A lot of serial killers have been either suspected or diagnosed with borderline, and also borderlines in with it's part of the cluster B section of personality disorders. Borderlines in with narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and histrionic personality disorder. Antisocial and narcissistic and borderline are all like traits of different like serial killers and like just really awful people. So when you see borderline, you think the cluster B, and then you think Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, like, I don't know, some dictator somewhere. I don't know. So, we get paired in with those guys, and I'm like, I honestly cried about running over the possum 3 weeks ago. So I don't think I'm going to be offing somebody anytime soon. Like, so there's a lot. And because we don't know how to treat it, we're scared of it.
Do you think that that is part of like the downfall of Western medicine is, we're talking about diagnosis, which comes to them from the DSM-5, which they diagnose people from that. And would you say that that is part of the downfall, is that it's categorized and you're put into this category and matched up, and that it's just, like you said, a kind of a one size fits all, but that's not really how it works looking at the whole person?
I think so. I think also like there are a lot of trauma-informed therapists that also won't treat borderline because we're so unpredictable. So I read this book that I basically passed along to my family after I highlighted the living daylights out of it. I believe it's called I Hate You, Don't Leave Me.
I have that book.
Yeah, it is fantastic. I
Yes.
highlighted the shit out of it. I have to actually get it back from my dad. But because I want to kind of go through for future episodes, because like this, I highlighted the crap out of it when I was 27 and I'm 31 now, but I'm sure some of it still resonates. I kind of want to reread it and be like, what has changed? What hasn't? But that was the first time that I had heard that trauma-informed therapists hate treating people with borderline. And I get it. You have to protect your peace. And when you feel like you're going in circles with somebody, it doesn't feel productive. But to people like me that read that, we're just like, oh, so we're just beyond help.
That's interesting that you say that. And it's really sad that that's been the experience, because when I was taking courses and training to do emotionally focused therapy, that book was recommended to me by my mentor to read, because my daughter was going through, when we talk about attachment. So emotionally focused therapy is based on attachment theory. And so it's interesting that you mentioned that some therapists shy away from that because it is, like you said, unpredictable. I just find that very interesting that there is that approach from therapy when so many, I believe, of these diagnoses do stem from attachment. So that would be the number one way as a therapist that you could even help somebody, is providing that safe place and helping them understand that attachment.
Yeah, you would think. But a lot of it is just kind of trying to get them to stick to their appointments. I mean, I've gone through it. I've literally like canceled therapy because I'm just too tired to go, or I just don't want to talk about it. There's been instances of like a couple of months where I haven't gone, but my therapist is pretty persistent. They'll text me and just be like, "Hey, you don't have any appointments coming up, and I just happened to look, and it's been 2 months. So when can you come in?" And I'm just like, like, it's like time to talk about my issues again.
You're just sparking all these questions. Sorry. And I think it's really valuable for the listeners. What do you need from your therapist? Because you've mentioned that, the accountability is helpful, but also, just being that safe, consistent place. We're talking about this, bringing more awareness in hopes of shifting that frequency. And as somebody who works with a lot of people who have exactly what you have explained and are talking about, how can I more help my students and clients?
Right. Consistency and structure is like what I thrive off of. So having standing therapy appointments really helps because then I know, okay, I know every other Thursday at the time may vary, but I know every other this day, I have this, I have this. It also like is kind of the ADHD on top of it. With having borderline and all of that, structure and consistency is absolutely key. Everybody jokes that like, oh, I have anxiety, so like my husband put his shoes on wrong and I'm just like thinking I did something. I literally the other day, I can't remember what my husband did, but his tone was so different than usual. I was literally like internally like, this is it. This is like really it. Like he's had it. So the consistency is, and I mean, this man is the most consistent person on planet Earth, but as a therapist, I know what I have thrived on is consistency. And I actually kind of get annoyed when I'm starting to address something in therapy for a few weeks and then something else comes up and I'm like in therapy and I'm just talking to my therapist and I'm like, well, we can put that on the back burner because this shit just went down and I know we're going to be working on this for the next 3 sessions and then maybe we can get back to like what I want to do and how I want to be a better human being. So that also just kind of throws everything off when things just kind of happen for borderlines. So, and I say borderlines, when you're no longer 7 out of the 9, I need to note this, you get bumped down to what's called CPTSD, and I think it's complex post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah.
So while everybody's yip-yapping about how this is a personality disorder, when you're healed enough, it's a really fancy PTSD. So
Right.
shut it on that one. But so everybody's like, oh, it's a personality disorder. I'm like, it's a trauma response because the second you're no longer borderline, because I'm technically not borderline anymore, I am CPTSD. But it is also easier to say borderline because the second people hear CPTSD, they're like, oh, so you're cured. And I'm like, no. That just means I'm 6 out of 9.
Right.
I still deal with XYZ. But yeah, I think just consistency and structure.
That makes so much sense. It creates that safety and trust.
Yeah. And also just like creating those boundaries of being, I totally understand that you feel XYZ about this, but going off on this tangent isn't productive. What can we do to make this productive? You know,
sense.
like venting is fine, but especially with borderlines, we will spiral. Absolutely spiral.
I see that as like slowing them down.
Yeah, I think so. And just being like, I hear you. I understand that this is what you're dealing with.
That validation.
Yeah. Like, I hear you. I see you. How do we want to go about this?
So something to do.
Yeah. Especially when it's something to do. Because when you're all over the place with like your emotions, most coping skills go out the window. So when you're slowing them down and you're like looking back, what coping skills could we have used, kind of helps them to, well, helps me to see it in a new light instead of just it's the end of the damn world.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
So bringing some truth into it.
Yeah.
I call that when I'm working with people, we get triggered and it's like this, I explain it as like there's this doorway. And over here, you're in your truth. And when you get triggered, you pass through the doorway. And anything you think, say, and do over here is a lie. Like everything, all the thoughts and everything. And so helping them become present to go back through the doorway to truth, per se.
Yeah, it's definitely helpful, especially because we can just spiral. And the next thing you know, Saturn's going to come crashing through my front door kind of thing.
You know, Heather, your openness and vulnerability and just sharing your story is just really inspiring. And I just, again, I love your authenticity. So I'm just curious on how dealing with trauma and navigating your emotions has, you know, influenced your journey of physical and mental healing with BPD and, like you said, ADHD and CPTSD. How have addressing and processing your emotions, because we were talking about that attachment and going to therapy, really contribute to your overall healing process, both, you know, physically and mentally?
I mean, I definitely would say that therapy has done more than anything. Like, I'm definitely in a much, much better place. I will say that you are going to have ebbs and flows with this. I know I do. I actually have felt more symptomatic since starting the podcast, and I thought it was kind of weird because I had a blog about this for the longest time. I really think it's because I was only unpacking things at the surface. When you're actually talking about them, like physically talking about them, it brings up a lot. Probably why I'm so tired these days. But I think really finally addressing things in the last couple of months has mentally, I feel a little bit better. Physically, I mean, we all know the body keeps score. When you're really talking about a lot about mental health and you're bringing it up and you're thinking about it, and you're, especially with having a podcast, and I'm not bitching at all about having a podcast. I love that I have that platform, and I will continue to love having that platform. But when you're lying in bed at night and thinking about and scripting an episode and thinking about like, oh, this like thing that I'm going to finally deal with and put to bed, and we're going to talk about it. And, you know, when I was talking about in my episode about friendships, that took a lot out of me, because to admit how we address friendships and how different it is than with quote normal people, I was exhausted for like 3 days. So when you're healing from this, it's incredibly tiring. Like, I just want to sleep. Literally, the finale is next week for the first season, and I'm like, I cannot wait to just sleep for like 2 days. Like, I'm not even thinking about this stuff for a week because I am tired.
Yeah.
When you're navigating your emotions, especially when you're looking back, it can be really tiring. And when you're going through a split or you're going through a whole bunch of stuff at once, physically you're worn down and mentally you're worn down even more. I think this is worth saying. If you have borderline or bipolar or depression or anxiety, you may have noticed that when you're really pushing yourself physically, like you're busy and this, that, and the other thing, I noticed for me, it is really hard to emotionally regulate, like really hard. The more tired I am, the more I do not have the mental bandwidth to emotionally regulate. And you know, everybody kind of snaps when they're tired, and then they're like, oh, I'm just tired and I'm a little hungry. But for borderlines, that like tired and a little hungry can literally mean like verbally eviscerating somebody. So it's just constantly exhausting. So it's just finding that balance of navigating the emotions and doing all of the unpacking, but also giving myself time to do nothing. Yesterday, I could have gone live for a couple hours because you can also find me on TikTok. I could have gone live for a couple hours in between clients. I was done at the studio by like 3 o'clock, came home. I knew I had to leave by 7 to go back to the studio. I could have gone live for a couple hours. I could have been productive. I could have done this. I could have done that. And while I felt guilty about not doing any of those things, I straight up laid on my bed and doom scrolled for like 2 hours. And it was fantastic. I will say you have to find that balance. And I'm still struggling to find that balance as part of the healing process. Healing's not linear. You're not going to fix things from your past and nothing's ever going to happen to you, which has been my biggest struggle, because I'll be in therapy, we'll be unpacking things, and then something will happen. Like I'd said earlier, I'm annoyed because now I have to put that to the side and deal with this thing, and I don't want to do that. So not having things going to plan is also like a little bit of a struggle with the healing process. I'll never say that you shouldn't address and process things, because you absolutely should. It can just be exhausting, so you have to give yourself a little more grace. And I think having my people and communicating with those people, like my sister and my husband, they're like my constants. So if I have had a really long week, blah, 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 I'm going to snap. It's not for them to tiptoe around, but it's for them to give me a little bit of grace, but also to sit there and go, okay, I get you're going through a lot, but you don't get to XYZ. Like, they also have a limit. I mean, communication is very key with this, especially when you're trying to self-regulate, which is, I've been doing this for 6 years and I'm still struggling. It's going to be a constant struggle.
Thank you. And, you know, I think I hear in all of this, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that through this journey, you have kind of like you were explaining safe connections, is that you have experienced that duality, really the expectation that life is not black and white. And while you have found modalities, say your therapy and even your podcast and all of these different things that have brought healing, they have also brought exhaustion, because they require you to address things and sit in the uncomfortable and feel the ick and be in those funky, shitty moments, and to have that mirror kind of brought up to you and like, hey, you know, this is what you're doing. This is how it's also affecting me.
Yeah.
Like, I love you, I care about you, but this also affects me.
Exactly.
With that, really navigating maybe what self-care looks like and feels like for you. And you were saying that, you know, yesterday you just scrolled. And while that may have been in the past and even still a little bit sparks some guilt, that you are finding what you need through this. And like you were saying with finding the therapist, that you're going to have to try things and it may be a little exhausting, but it's going to be worth it.
Yeah.
Is that close?
Yeah. It's going to be exhausting, but it is 1,000% worth it. You just have to give yourself the grace. And if you know that you're going to be sorting out some stuff that's a little heavier, try and carve out some extra time for yourself.
Yeah, that's huge.
Because that's going to be the fine line between actually healing and making yourself worse.
Right.
Like, that's just really important.
And I think that you brought up two huge things. Is staying busy is like a dissociation. It's something that I struggle with.
Yep.
You know, you can stay busy so you don't have to feel that uncomfortable. You're like, okay, I'm being productive, I'm being busy, but taking it to the extreme, it could also mean that we're not allowing ourselves space to process emotions and work through things.
Yeah, basically. And when you're just overtired, it doesn't end well for anybody.
Right. You also mentioned something else that I thought was really important. You said that healing is not linear and those expectations. And I think that that's so huge. I'm definitely an advocate of this, is that we're always going to be on this journey. Yep. And so that can be really disappointing for some people. And it can also release the expectation that we have to get somewhere. There's no finish line. Once we get to this little marker, that marker moves.
Yep.
Because for people who are always moving forward and always healing, is that it does require movement, and not all the time. It does require us to stop, but always that movement forward in that healing journey, allowing ourselves to know that there is no end, that this is not a sprint. It is a long distance run.
Yep.
And so to pace yourself.
Exactly. I went through a whole stage of basically healing perfectionism, where it was, I did all the groups, I read all the books, I basically gave myself healing burnout because I knew I'd hurt so many people, and I was so focused on putting those fires out and showing that I was a different person, healing to the point where I was burnt out. And now I'm finding a balance. Now I'm finding a balance of, you know, I'm still trying to be a better person, and I'm still, you know, accountable for the things I say and the things I do, but also there's only so much healing you can do in a certain amount of time. And then, you know, you have your like one or two individuals where it doesn't matter how much you heal, you are still going to be the same shitbag that they view you as. And that's that. So it's a process. Whatever you do, do not go into healing burnout, because it takes you so long to recover from. Like, read the books, do the research, but don't try to literally find this level of perfection that is so unattainable.
Right.
It's just unattainable.
Yeah. And for so many of the listeners, people that I know, is that perfectionism. I talk a lot about that perfectionism. It's just ingrained in us. And that's why I love saying fuck perfect, because there really is no perfection. Yep. Perfection is in the eye of the beholder, and that is different for everybody.
Yep.
And so, you know, with that, I think it's really important to mention that, like Heather was saying, you know, I have been doing this journey for over 10 years, and I am still learning and growing. I just had a therapy session where she was like, hey, you're doing great. Here's this piece. You missed it for yourself. We're always learning and always growing. And especially for people who feel like maybe they know all the tools and they know all of the things that they're supposed to do, that they're never going to experience pain or burnout or symptoms or triggers. That's not the case. We are all on this fucking journey together. We're all going to fail. We're going to fail forward. We're going to keep learning. We're going to keep growing. We're going to keep encouraging one another and continue to build safety so that people can grow and heal in their own time and just love them right where they are.
Exactly.
Heather, thank you so much for being here. I definitely hope to have you on in the future, because I feel like we could talk about this stuff for hours.
We absolutely could. This has been so much fun.
Right? I love talking to you.
Same.
It's very easy and fun. And I look forward to being on your podcast soon. So that's exciting.
Yes, I cannot wait.
You guys, Heather's information will be in the description of the episode and all of that good shenanigans. Heather, thank you. Everybody have an amazing day. I look forward to talking to you guys in the next episode. And remember, connection over perfection.